much. She will be doing all of our Zoom tech items this evening. So our wonderful Sarah has
Sarah, I
to go.
Thank you for recording. Please do not put this on the internet. You may send it to your members, but
Absolutely.
don't put it on the internet. That make it accessible. Okay, well, welcome everybody.
Yeah, Allison, let me just go ahead and introduce you real quick. Everybody, thank you for being here. In case you aren't sure where you are, the program that you are witnessing now is called Redistricting in Washington. And Allison McCaffrey is our special guest speaker today. Before we start, I would like to say on behalf of the 34 LD Democrats, I acknowledge the land on which we stand today as the traditional home of the Coast Salish and Duwamish people, the traditional home of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, Snoqualmie, and Muckleshoot nations. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering or to this dialogue, and I ask that we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land on which we live and work, who are still here. Allison McCaffrey is the Executive Director of Politics of the Possible in Action. Allison holds mechanical engineering degrees from Stanford University and MIT, also an MBA from the Sloan School of Business at MIT. From 2011 to 2016, Allison launched Washington State's first nonprofit association called Washington Nonprofits. And Allison now leads the Politics of the Possible in Action. It's an organization inspired by the philosophies of her grandmother, a 4-term Washington State representative. Politics of the Possible in Action focuses on increasing citizen engagement, enhancing civics education, and honoring public service, advocating for transparency, accountability, and equitable representation. Allison has held the position of issue chair on redistricting and census for the League of Women Voters of Washington since 2017. So it is a real treat today to, hey, turn the mic right over to Allison. Let's give her a nice big waving hands, welcome, or clapping, or however you want to do it. Allison, it's all yours.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Thanks everybody for being here tonight. I know you've got lots of choices for how you spend your evening. So talking with me about redistricting is tremendous. Definitely doing your civic duty. So as Rachel said, I got my start in redistricting literally at the knee of my grandmother. She was a 4-term state legislator who led redistricting in Washington State for the first time ever since statehood back in 1965. And she wrote her book called Politics of the Possible. See, can you see it through my background? Not really, there it is. And asked me to help her do the research on it and go dig in the archives and find out all the historical research. So when we started doing the history of redistricting, I got interested in what the modern day redistricting was all about. And then the league appointed me as the issue chair. So for the last 4 years, I've been leading the advocacy efforts around redistricting for the League of Women Voters in Washington State. So today, this is a Redistricting 101 presentation, Redistricting Why It Matters. We'll do a little poll here in a second, just to see who's, what level of understanding you guys already have. And I'm happy to customize it with whatever questions or however deep you want to go into some part of it. Rachel has asked a little bit more on the racial gerrymandering aspects and the potential for representation for people of color to maybe go into that a little bit more. So I will plan to do that. But if there's anything else that you want to make sure I cover, you can put that in chat and I'll make sure I touch on it. Okay, so away we go. So redistricting, why it matters. So as Rachel said, I support myself by running a nonprofit called Politics the Possible in Action after my grandmother. So here's our poll. So just put in chat one of these answers or something like it, but how much do you know already about redistricting? Is it something it's brand new to you? Have you been reading the newspapers about it? You know a little bit about it? Could you help me give this presentation? And we've got Anne, who knows a lot. She's spent a lot of time and testified some. Yeah. Some. Okay. Marcy, thanks. Yeah, so happy to, we'll go over the basics, but I won't spend a whole lot of time on that. Just to make sure we don't lose anybody, and then we can get into whatever details you guys want. Thanks for that. So the basics, just remembering that redistricting is a fundamental process in our voting apparatus, right, for this country. It goes back to the founding of a country and the ideal of we want our country to be governed by we the people. But how do you do that with hundreds of millions of people, right? So the creation of a representative government means that we have to organize ourselves in a certain way, and redistricting, reapportionment, which is counting all of us and divvying us up, and then redistricting, deciding the geographic nature of that is so fundamental. And everybody knows we did the census last year, and you probably heard that the final census numbers were out last week. We'd been waiting. Normally they're out in April, but we'd been waiting and waiting for them. I think it's a good thing that we made sure that they were spot on and they were checked and double checked. Most people think of the census as, you know, this, like somebody coming to your door, but really only 5% of households ever get visited by a census worker, and it was slightly less during the pandemic. I just want to make sure that we all know why the census is important. Of course, because we use those numbers for redistricting. That's why it's part of this presentation. But also, and that's at every level. That's at obviously your congressional level, then your state level, and all the local levels as well. Use those same census numbers. But don't forget that it also gets used to allocate money, right? So if someone isn't counted in the census, then their municipality may not get as much funding for services in that area. And it's so crucial that we get that allocated correctly. It's almost 900 billion now for this year. And then lastly, the census numbers are used by so many people to make decisions about, you know, where's Walmart going to put their next store? What nonprofits need to go in where for which kind of services, right? All these numbers are used to project and allocate. Universities are using them for all these sort of studies that then get based, you know, every other decision gets based off of those kind of studies. So important to realize that the census is the basis for all these things. Questions on census or anything so far? So the numbers that just came out last week are the specific block by block redistricting numbers, and they came out in a legacy format, so they're not quite as easy for lay people to process. The Census Bureau is going to put out more and more graphs and charts and stuff on their website to
I have a question, Allison,
yeah, go ahead.
about why the census is important.
Mhm.
So as far as these numbers that came out, I know it's impossible to just get into the weeds on it right now, but were there any kind of meta big picture things that you can talk about?
Sure,
as far as
yeah.
like, was it Was the count lower? Were there districts that are going to get less money or fewer
Yeah.
elected officials or whatever?
So one of the most interesting things was over the decade, we were having a really fast, high trajectory of growth. And so a lot of the predictions had us a bunch higher than the final numbers came in. So it basically, our growth kind of petered out at the end of the decade. So that was kind of a surprise. And that affects things like Texas was going to get 3 representatives more, or an increase of 3, and they only got 2, and things like that. So at the congressional level, that was one example of the difference in growth wasn't quite as much as we saw. And as I was looking at the numbers for Washington today, that holds true for Washington as well. We thought Seattle was going to be on this. I mean, it was big. It was 21% that Seattle grew, right? But given the trajectory, we were mapping a lot higher growth, and it looked like that in the last year or so it tapered off. And we know there is some, it's not that they were wrong, but there are some differences this decade from before. We had less college students actually in college on April 1st. So there was some adjustments there, and people are looking at just how much the university areas have been affected. The other thing that we know for sure is that the country is getting more diverse. The number of people of color is growing rapidly compared to the number of people who identify as white, and so that's got a lot of implications in terms of the balancing of districts. We're also seeing more gentrification. I was just looking at the King County numbers. So we're seeing larger growth of people of color in the outlying districts. We're seeing more white and Asian percentage-wise in the urban centers of cities. That certainly holds true for Seattle and lots of other urban centers around the country.
I think one of our folks is asking about undocumented folks.
Yeah.
How does that figure into the?
Yeah, so it's really important that the census is all the noses, everybody. It's, it's adults, it's kids, it's citizens, it's not citizens, it's voters and non-voters. It's
because everyone drives on the roads.
It's independent of, it's independent. And it's kind of a neat thing that that this is a place where a non-citizen can get counted as part of our system, right? And so important to do that. And it's also important to think, if you're a voter, just how many, because our representation is based on all people, the full population. If you're a voter, think of all the non-voters, non-eligible voters, non-voting age people that your vote represents. And that's also a realization when you're looking at all the numbers. So representation is based on anybody residing in the US. There's caveats for the military, and they figure that out. And also in Washington State, I'll talk a little bit, but we reallocate folks in what they call group quarters, so prisons or medical hospitals or things like that. Yeah, good question. So redistricting is the redrawing of the boundaries in order to have equal population again. We know there's almost 1 million more people in Washington State than there were 10 years ago. And we've got this ideal of one person, one vote. We want everybody's vote to count the same. So that means we have to rejigger our voting boundaries so we're back to equal population. Here's my 1, 2, 3 about why it matters. Redistricting is where your voting power starts. If we draw maps that represent you, then you can elect the person that you want to represent you. And then that elected person works on the issues that you care about. And the more we can maximize everybody feeling like I have a shot of electing somebody I want to represent me, then we're doing our job. Then the voices are heard in terms of who gets elected and which issues we work on. So let's just go to the House of Representatives for just a minute to do this allocation bit. So when we all know we've got, well, maybe people, I can do this as a question. How many people, congressmen and women, are in the House of Representatives? Let me put in chat what that number is. You kind of see on the chart, but 435. Thank you, Stephen. So we have capped that number since 1911. So that means as we grow as a nation, right, the number of people in each district grows. So you can see last decade, it was 672,000 people per congressional district. This time it's going to be 771 people per congressional district. Now there's some caveats because we give each state representative. So if they have less than one congressional district, they still get a representative. And one of the funny things is that if we had the same number of representatives as the Constitution said, we would have over 10,000 Congress members. And I don't think people want 10,000 Congress members. So we've had to adjust the number of people that each representative represents. Okay, so then we got the apportionment back in April. So that was where the total number, yeah, and so that's the total number of people in the US. And then the clerk of the House does this fairly complicated allocation. It's not quite as simple as just divide by 435, because every state gets one, and then you look at the remaining, and it all gets allocated. And then the clerk of the House writes an official note to each state and says, you get so many representatives. So here was the surprises I was talking about. California actually lost a representative. Texas got 2, not 3. Florida got 1, not 2, as predicted. Arizona got 0, not 1, and New York got -1 instead of -2. So that shows you kind of like the projections were a little bit higher than actually came about. So this means for Washington State, we keep our 10 congressional representatives. So here's what it looks like in a graph. You can see that there are the political implications of the Midwestern states, which are a lot of the battleground states losing a representative. While it's related, right? That's how many electoral college votes you get. It is kind of has some political implications there. Okay, so next it's given that we now know how many we have, our state representation is defined by state law. So that's 49 representatives in the Senate, and 49 districts, 2 each for our state House of Representatives. You can see by this chart that each state gets to decide how they want to allocate your districts. And Anne's asking about add 8. Oh, because I didn't put all the pluses and deltas on that chart. It does actually all add up to 435, and you can go on the census website and check all that out. Okay, so the Constitution says that the state legislators get to decide how they want to allocate their districts, right? How are they going to decide? And at first, all of the state legislatures, like the dark green states that are shown, decided, and it's a bill like any other bill. So their House has to pass it, a new map, and then their Senate, and then the governor has to sign it. So it's like any other bill. And of course, if you've got one party control in that state, then they control the redistricting process. So what we've seen in modern times is the is the trend to take this responsibility out of the hands of the legislators, who are the ones that are running in the districts that they're deciding. You can kind of see the inherent conflict of interest when you get to decide the district in the one that you're running in, right? So Washington State decided to go to a independent from the legislature commission. And you can see all the other ones in yellow there have now gone to independent from the legislature. There's all sorts of different flavors of those. The ones that are kind of got the little asterisks are ones like California that are a true citizen commission. So that means the 14 commissioners do not have roles with either party. They certainly could be a member or a voting or support the party. They have 5, and for California's example, they have 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 4 independents of the 2 parties. And then there's everything in between. Political commissions are ones that are sitting politicians are part of the group that decides. Utah and Iowa are interesting with advisory commissions that then advise the legislature. So lots of different flavors about how the districts are decided. Questions on this?
Yeah, this is Ann. What's a backup commission?
So that means that the legislature goes through the whole process of trying to create a map and create a bill that gets passed in the regular way. But if that is unsuccessful, then they have a group of people that it tips over to, and they decide the maps, and they have written in law that then the legislature has to vote on that map.
Yeah, thanks.
So in 1983, after decades, my grandmother's decades of just bitter battles, in my grandmother's time, the courts got involved, and they actually laid down the letter of the law that said no other law is legal until you redistrict, state legislators. And they went through almost 90 days of a legislative session trying to pass redistricting before they could pass any other law. So just epic battles in redistricting in the 60s, and then again in the 70s, and then again in the 80s. So finally in 83, we passed a constitutional amendment to create our redistricting commission. And we created a bipartisan commission. So there are 5 members of the commission, 4 of whom are appointed by each of the caucuses of the legislature. And then those 4 people are the voting members. They elect a non-voting chair, and that chair acts as the face of the commission and the chair of any meetings that they hold, and kind of the arbitrator. So I think it's great that this commission chose Miss Sarah Augustine to be their non-voting chair. She is the executive director of the Dispute Resolution Center in Yakima. So great choice for someone when they know they're going to do a lot of dispute resoluting. This is the first time we've ever had a person of color on the commission, and we have 3. Brady Pinheiro Walkinshaw is Latino, April Sims is Black, and Sarah Augustine is a member of the Yakima Nation. This is also the youngest commission we've ever had. I think it was, probably the last go around, nobody was under 60. You'd be hard pressed if any of these are over 60. So nice to have a very forward looking commission. Questions on the commission itself? They got appointed in January and have been working to set up the commission and set up the staff and have and do outreach meetings while they were waiting for the data to hit.
Allison,
Yeah.
so is this commission now going to be active for the next decade until the next census? Or how long do they do their thing? Or
So they really serve in earnest for the 11 months between January and November 15th, when their maps are due. That's their main thrust, right? And then they have some cleanup work to do kind of the end of the year and then into the next year. But really by the end of 2022, their job is done, right? The maps are in circulation. The auditors have done all of their, precinct creation and all of that. And we've voted in elections in the new districts, right? So while technically they're still appointed, and if anything were to come back and they needed to, I don't know, revisit or something, they would technically still be on the clock. Now, it's never happened, but they probably appoint another round if there was something dramatic that happened mid-century or something. So they really only work for this year, the 1 year, and then we get a new set in 10 years. Yeah, Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah, I've not too long ago, we've had some of our precincts have been reformatted, and and the boundaries have been moved, and some of them have been added, I think. Who does that after the initial redistricting period, which we're starting right now?
That is the role of the county auditors, and in King County, it's the elections department. What is that department called? I always forget. And they're the one,
elections office.
Elections office, yeah.
Yeah.
And so they are really the ones that are maintaining, right? Because you're always having like cities annex a part, and then those people can vote in the city election. You're having population growth, and we have a law that precincts can't be more than 1,500 folks, so you have to split. And so auditors' offices do all that, and they are a wealth of knowledge about where the district lines are, and they're kind of the customer from the redistricting commission, because it all flows down to the point where an auditor's office has to take the congressional districts, the legislative districts, your fire districts, your school districts, all those kinds of things, layer them all on top of each other and figure out who gets a ballot that's all the same, right? So it's like a big puzzle piece that lays on top of each other. Mm-hmm.
So Allison, I think, as I recall, there are every year some boundary adjustments that are actually reviewed by the parties and can be commented on, but they're not well advertised. But there are adjustments made, and public comment allowed.
Yeah, and most of those, like the year I spent every Tuesday morning going to the Pierce County commissioners meetings, right? They have okay, we're going to adjust these boundaries. Is there comment? It's part of the minutia of the work of the county. And I think you're right. I mean, people don't know this redistricting goes on every 10 years. And then there's all the little adjustments that go on throughout the decade. Yep. So here's our overall timeline, right? We started with the census. January, the commissions appointed. The League of Women Voters did speak up schools to try to train people to testify, and got lots of people engaged, and we're very happy with the folks that did testify. They were just so great. We're going to get another chance. They just sent the dates out in early October to comment on the draft maps that the commission will put out. So we hope that everybody will take a look at the maps and then be inspired to comment on those maps in October. And then, like I said, the final maps are due by our state constitution on midnight of November 15th. Then there's, when the legislature comes in session, there's some technical fixes if they need to do a technical fix, but their legislature really has a very small role, and they only can adjust by less than 2% of any district and those kinds of things. The governor has no role. And then the auditors go to work, and those new districts are used. The earliest primaries in some areas are in March, but most have the August primaries. So think about using the new districts in elections for 2022. So most of you are familiar. Here's our congressional districts, right? Less population density in Eastern Washington. So those congressional districts are geographically bigger than those in the Puget Sound area. And then our legislative districts, same population density. We also know that when these were drawn, there were 5 majority people of color legislative districts. Those have since adjusted, obviously. And that's another thing to consider when we're looking at communities of interest at the new districts. Yeah, I think that's. So why is this controversial? Somebody type it in chat. Just to get your juices flowing. You win the booby prize. Anybody? Rachel looks like she's trying to type something.
Yes.
There we go. Why is redistricting controversial, right? What is it about redistricting that puts it in the news, right? Marcy comes away with gerrymandering. Yeah, we've all heard this term. Favor a political party. Definition of gerrymandering. Exactly, Rachel. So we know that the power has been abused and there's been biases put in the system. So gerrymandering is that manipulation of boundaries to favor a political party, right? Or a class, I suppose. You know, I would say, oh, I love the Allison party. Let's get as many Allison party elected as possible, right? It goes back to the term goes back to 1812, when Governor then Elbridge Gerry drew this crazy district in the northeast of Massachusetts, and some enterprising reporter drew the sketch on the right-hand side of the slide, right? And somebody thought that looked like a salamander. So they put Gary and salamander together, and it morphed to gerrymandering. Personally, I think it looks more like a dragon, but maybe Gary dragoning just wasn't going to catch on or something, right? So we've been having this kind of manipulation ever since there's been political parties, but it wasn't till this particular time frame that we've got this term gerrymandering. So let's do a little hypothetical here. So here's our really simple state. And we have perfect knowledge about which party they're going to vote for, right? So we've got 40 Democrats, 40 Republicans. Split this state up into 4 districts of 20 people each. How would you go about doing that? If we were trying to be fair, what would we do? Somebody have a suggestion?
You're trying to be fair, or if you
Yeah.
want to win your election.
Trying to be fair, right? I'm a league person. I'm a nonpartisan. Let's represent people well. 4 districts of 20 people each, right? We know we have to do that. That's our equal population. But we kind of got, look at the blues in the center, right? Maybe that's a city. Little higher density, little democratic, right? Maybe we got a rural area in the lower right. The engineer in me says, let's make it a grid. That'd be fair, right? Just split it in quarters. So let's think about that. What would that do? I think I've got it here, right? What would that do? It would crack those blue dots in that city. And so the blues aren't very happy, right? Because their voting power gets split between all 4 districts. So that's probably not it. Then we might do something else, maybe like that. Looks reasonable, right? I haven't actually counted all the dots to see what the, so maybe it's something like that. So these are just really simple examples to get our brain thinking about if we wanted to do it to be fair, how would we do it? Maybe we could get 10 and 10 in each district, perhaps. But we might start drawing some really squiggly districts, and then people don't like those districts either. So let's do the easier case, which is let's just gerrymander the heck out of it and go, if I'm a Democrat, I'm going to gerrymander for Democrats. If I'm a Republican, I'm a gerrymander for Republicans, right? So this is what that might look like. So I haven't moved any of the dots in the square. But in the left-hand example, I'm doing a Democratic gerrymander, right? And I pack all of that rural, southeast corner of our state into one district, and they get 20 Republican votes. They win hands down. But then in our state house, say, the Democrats win the other 3 districts. Now, if I'm the other party, right, if I'm a Republican, then I'm gonna gerrymander the other way and pack all of the Democrats in the city all together. And then as a Republican, I can win the other three districts. So now I've got control of that state house or that Senate. So questions here? Yeah.
Yes. So the first thing you said at the top was, how can we do this to be fair?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking,
Real estate
what is
rules.
the idea? What does fair even mean?
Exactly.
Because I don't consider that if one party or another party is trying to carve up the state to favor themselves, that's not fair to me.
That's not fair, right? We're pretty sure that these 2 gerrymanders are not fair.
Right.
Right.
So
So
why can't they just put a plus quadrant
plus.
and why not?
Because that plus actually really favored the Republicans, right? It actually it split up all those Democratic votes. So is it representative of the folks in that city? For example, Bremerton right now is split into 3 districts, right? They don't like that because it's not representative of their city. So we know that it's got to be somewhere in between, but we probably don't want the computer to decide for us. That one probably wouldn't go over well either. So we'll talk about it a little more when we get to specific partisan gerrymandering in a little bit. The point of this little exercise is to say where you draw the lines really matters. Because we didn't change where anybody lived. And in this case, we had perfect knowledge. So where you draw the lines really matters. So here's an actual example from an 0204 redistricting, right? In Texas, we've got Austin, Texas, lots of Latinos in Austin, Texas. In 02, they were split in two districts. And then by the redistricting in 04, the enterprising folks in the Texas legislature created this orange district and decided they were going to put Austin or the Travis County in 3 districts and split. In this case, it split up the Latino vote even more, as an example. Okay, so it is true that both parties have done it historically. We've got all sorts of folks, even in this round, trying to understand the playing field and see what they can do to favor their party or tip the balance back if they think it's tipped one way or the other. And the more interesting thing is just how extreme it's gotten because of our large data set processing, our computational models, the fact that you can go grab ACLU memberships and NRA memberships, you can grab Amazon purchases, you can figure out who your friends are on Facebook, and you can put that all into a model, and then it's become big consulting business to sell those models to the deciders so they can use all that. So what in my grandmother's day was a very small group of people using a small set of data now has become large numbers of data of people with large sets of data. So here's a nice fun picture. This is my grandmother's redistricting team in 1965. They used Shell gas station maps, rulers and pencils to make those maps. They did have the number 10, counting machine that my granddad ran weekend after weekend. But it is kind of interesting to see how far we've come and just how different it is in some respects these days. My grandmother is the woman standing up on the left-hand side. And you might recognize the man on the right-hand side in the glasses. A lot of them have glasses. That's Slade Gordon.
Oh, yeah.
Who saw redistricting from every position for 7 decades. Okay, questions so far on that? Okay, so that's kind of our just basics, making sure we've got the lingo down. Then I want to go through kind of redistricting in the courts and the types of gerrymandering. We've got 3 main types. We've got racial gerrymandering, prison gerrymandering, and partisan gerrymandering. So let's start with racial gerrymandering. Now we know that because redistricting is part of our voting process, it is subject to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so not discriminating in our voting practices applies to redistricting. All of those kinds of things apply. So one of the things that the Voting Rights Act said in its original incantation, right, was that states would require approval if their voting laws change. They require approval by the federal courts, right? Until 2013, and the Supreme Court decided Shelby v. Holder, and threw out that requirement, said it was no longer valid. And there's some great dissents by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and there's some amazing just case discussion on it. But what this means is that those states no longer have to get any of their redistricting laws passed by the courts. And of course, we've seen lots with voter ID over the last decade and those kinds of things since this. But I wanted to point out that that's a big deal for redistricting, because if you're looking at particularly racial gerrymandering, right, there is no double check on if you are racially gerrymandering, if you are trying to pack Latinos or African Americans, right, and disfavor that group by putting them all in one district, so they have less voting power in other districts.
But Allison, has there not also been a case in which it was found that there was racial gerrymandering? I'm not sure if it was North Carolina or. Absolutely.
I mean, lots and lots of court cases, right? So this is the pre-clearance, right? But once the redistricting law goes into effect and you start voting in those districts and you see a clear pattern of disenfranchisement, that's when the ACLU gets together and they do a gerrymandering case. Lots and lots of case law that defines racial gerrymandering. Absolutely. One of the reasons why we have the Washington Voting Rights Act was because, and I'll go through the Yakima example, because we were seeing local jurisdictions having these kinds of problems. And we, in Yakima, they literally made a federal case of it, right? And we wanted to be able to have remedies that were in Washington state for those kinds of reasons. So let me go through you guys might have heard, so here's, you might have heard of the North Carolina case. So North Carolina 12th has been to the Supreme Court 4 or 5 times this decade. This is a case where the Democrats are suing the Republicans for packing African Americans into this 12th district, and therefore the Republicans can have control of the other districts. So they keep suing them for racial gerrymandering. The court would say, yes, you're racial gerrymandered, go back and fix it. Then they'd go do another map, they'd get sued again. So again and again, trying to fight this idea of racial gerrymandering in North Carolina. So that's one example that's been in the courts overall. The funny thing is, the very last time they said, oh, we're not racial gerrymandering, we're partisan gerrymandering because all of those African Americans vote Democratic. And of course we had no remedy. So they had to bring a different suit. Here's another interesting example. This is one of my favorite crazy districts. This is called the Earmuff District. In Chicago. And if anybody's from Chicago, they can help me out with the neighborhoods. But this was created to actually get Latino representation in the congressional delegation in Illinois. It has never been to court. It was created so that the Mexican American population, I think in the south of Chicago, and the Puerto Rican neighborhood north of Chicago could all be in a district and elect a person they wanted. Now this district is contiguous. You can actually drive from every point because of the freeway over there, 294 on the west side. And Representative Gutierrez got reelected in this district 13 times with over 75% of the vote. Did it work to get Latino representation? Absolutely. Is it racial gerrymandering? Probably, right? But it was done for a specific purpose to get some Latino representation. So this is where racial gerrymandering is a little tricky, because you've got the Voting Rights Act on one side, and then you've got cracking and packing on the other side. You want people to have representation, but you don't want it to be too extreme that it means that they can't get greater representation in the bigger chamber. So here's the example from the city of Yakima. This is a little opposite intuitive, but the darker the color means the higher percentage white people, right? So you can see the light spots in Eastern Yakima are easily 60, some almost 80% Latino. And in the city of Yakima, they had never elected a Latino city council person, even though 40% overall, 40% of the population of the city of Yakima is Latino. So they took the city to court, was the ACLU on behalf of the citizens, and they won. And they said, well, your remedy is to split up the city into districts. Everybody ran at large before, and it was always the white people that were winning. So they split, the remedy was to split up the city into districts. And in the first election after districting, 3 Latina women won in districts 1, 4, and 2 from their neighborhoods, right? And so that was seen as a good remedy. Since then, it's been kind of a struggle to keep up the support, and that representation has dropped a little bit, which is it's a whole saga in and of itself. But I think it's a great example of this racial tension, right? We're trying, we love our geographic districts, right? We're trying to understand that when you have an at-large, it's not representative of the city. And so districting is one of the remedies to try to get better representation in your whatever chamber you're dealing with. Questions there? Had you guys heard of the Yakima case over the last, I think that was 8 years ago now?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've got another county, one that's going on right now too. Okay, so with racial gerrymandering, it really is a balancing act, right? You have to be conscious of race because you want to have people be able to vote in the people they want to represent them. Now, I'm not saying all people of race always vote the same way. That's just not, of course, not true, right? But it's also true that we've not seen the representation from a racial diversity that that's representative in our general population. So you have to be conscious of race, but you can't be too conscious of race or you're discriminating the other way. And there's all sorts of case law about this balance, to try to be representative, but not punitive. So that's the bit about racial gerrymandering. Any other questions? I think one of the interesting things is once you get beyond packing and cracking, you're talking about, given the way our system is designed, you're talking about what does the community want in terms of percentage voting power in certain districts. So we still have large Latino populations in Central Washington, and I personally have been in lots and lots of conversations trying to understand what the community wants in terms of how to split up those voters to represent that area the best, the way they want to be represented. And we're hearing a lot about keep the Yakima Nation together, try to get at least one of the districts, the 14th or the 15th, to be majority BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And don't break up that people of color vote too much. And it's tricky. There's lots, I could tell you lots of details about how that's actually going to play out. But if you're looking at the maps, the draft maps, definitely look at the Yakima area and see how they're proposing to split that up because of the high percentage of Latino voters, or Latino people, and as a consequence, Latino voters as well. Okay, so the second type of gerrymandering is prison gerrymandering. And this comes about because most prisons are in rural areas, and most people who get put in prison are from urban areas. And the Census Bureau counts prisoners in prison. So you can see that movement from urban areas to rural areas is a type of gerrymandering that disproportionately favors the rural areas with those folks' headcount in their area. So there is the Prison Policy Initiative that has been raising awareness about this. There's now 5 or 6 states including Washington State, that passed laws to reallocate group quarters, prison populations back to their home districts. And this means that, you know, someone with a Seattle address that happens to be in a prison in Walla Walla will get reallocated back to their home district. It makes sense to me because they're not in prison for, a lot of times they're not in prison for the whole decade, right? They're going to return back to their homes. Their families, their communities are back in that, in their home location. Thanks, Anne. And so you can see kind of where the largest prison populations are in Washington State. And it does make a significant difference for places like Walla Walla, has 9,000 prisoners that most of those will get reallocated, or Mason County has a, you know, smaller county, but 1,500 prisoners makes a difference in their count for their districts. Any questions on that? Okay, so then we get to what we were talking about before when we were in our gerrymandering example, which is partisan gerrymandering. And since I'm trying to be nonpartisan, I was trying to find a picture, and I thought the kids with the candy was a good representation of trying to get the candy. And the question here really is partisan gerrymandering constitutional, and how much is too much, right? We were talking about the Latino voters in Yakima. Obviously, some representation makes sense, but how much is too much if you were to favor that group or party? So this has an interesting history. That it kind of starts here, that you can think of like, if at a statewide level, the Republicans get 37% of the vote, how many seats in the state legislature should they get as a percentage? I know you're looking at me like, duh.
Not 37.
37, right? Like, it just makes sense to our brains that if you got 48% of the vote, you should get 48% of the seats, right? And 53 and 53. So this is called proportionality, right? That if you have certain percentage of votes, you get that same proportion in the seats. This is the key thing. Our system does not work that way. In every state, it's a function of our single member first past the post system. There is a winner's bonus. So you're getting, if you get over that 50% threshold, you actually get more than your total percentage of seats. And it's played out again and again, and all the mathematicians have proven it and whatnot. If you think about it, just from a practical standpoint, say our congressional delegation, right? If we're 65% Democratic and 35% Republican, right? And you send 10 people to Washington, what happens at that fourth seat, right? You can't send a half and half. You have to, you have to go one way or the other. So your proportions are going to be off. And that because we're doing granularity, right? We have to chunk it up. You're always going to be off the percentages. And that this idea that there's a winner's bonus. Okay, so that's something to just accept, right? Our system doesn't work proportionally. Yeah,
Okay,
Rachel.
Allison? Yeah, question. Does this sort of bump, if they have 53% of the votes, does this kind of bump from 53 to 65 have anything to do with sort of giving the threshold of the 2/3 thing so that they can pass votes if they, I don't know, I'm trying to understand why.
That's certainly, well, I mean, these are just examples, right? It's like, this is just to show this winner's bonus, right? In some states, it's a little bit less, in other states, a little bit more. Sometimes it depends on the candidates, right? Like it's really hard to generalize specific percentages, but the idea that there is a winner's bonus holds true. So yes, I think going to a 2/3 or a 3/4 vote is one type of remedy to try to say, oh, hey, the party that's in the minority has a little bit more power if they can block that vote, right? If they can get one more than the 2/3 required or something, or one less than the 2/3 required. So it is a way we try to compensate. It's kind of a big sledgehammer though. So I'm not sure that that's the best thing to do. And of course, there's all the reforms, right? There's people who want more proportional. There's folks advocating for ranked choice voting and multi-member districts, right? Those are all things that would reduce the effect of this in our system if we were to pass those kinds of things. The physical district lines would be less influential if you had multi-member districts, for example. Okay, so then we go to the latest incarnation of partisan gerrymandering in the courts. Started in 2004 with the Supreme Court case Veith. And this was really interesting because the decision came down 4-1-4. Four progressive judges said absolutely partisan gerrymandering is unconstitutional. We should outlaw it. We should write it in law. 4 conservative judges said, it's a political thicket, nothing to do with us. We shouldn't do anything with it. And then we had Justice Kennedy that said, I think it's unconstitutional, but we don't have any way to decide to actually measure how much is too much. And so you can imagine the decision for the time being was not to do anything, but Justice Kennedy's vote was sought very heavily, right? And it became the search for a metric of gerrymandering metric for how much was too much. Prove there's gerrymandering going on here, partisan gerrymandering, right? So one of our examples is Wisconsin, a very purple state in the presidential elections. I think the one I'm showing here is actually Clinton and Trump, true in the latest one as well. A lot of Democrats living in the cities, you can see by the map. And because the Republicans hold power and they can draw the lines to favor them, even though it's a 50-50 state, the Republicans are getting 65% of the seats in their state house, in their assembly. So you can see those two numbers, right? 45% of the people voted Republican, but they get 61% of the vote. So the Democrats take the Republicans to court and say, you're partisan gerrymandering in your redistricting. We want to redraw the lines differently. But how do you measure? And the social scientists went to town. They created so many metrics. And actually in the Wisconsin case, the Gill v. Whitford case, there were 51 amicus briefs on metrics about how to decide. Here's just some examples. You might have heard the efficiency gap in the news. You might have heard mean median biasing. And then the one I particularly like is that histogram, the red histogram there in the upper right, where the computer scientists and the mathematicians, they create millions and millions of maps, and then they see who would win given, the voting data and the maps, who would win. And they would say, well, you picked a map that was way out on the tail. That's clearly not part of the standard curve. Shouldn't you pick a map that's right in the tall part of the histogram, right? Where there's 500,000 to choose from. Why didn't you pick one of those? Well, you were clearly biasing it for your party's favor, right? Okay, so then in June 2018, they kicked the can down the road with the Gill v. Whitford, and they said, no standing, 9-0 decision, no standing, with some interesting dissents that were trying to say, hey, you need to do this, this, and this to get back to the court for proving partisan gerrymandering. If you ever listen to a Supreme Court oral arguments, I recommend the Gill v. Whitford one. If you know a little bit about gerrymandering, it is so interesting and funny in some respects and sad in other respects, just how casual all of the Supreme Court justices are being about their language. So I recommend it. It is really interesting and entertaining in lots of ways. So then we go back to another round of partisan gerrymandering in the courts, and we get one from both sides. Maryland is the Republicans suing the Democrats for adding this spark plug type, the district that's suburbia Washington, D.C. So they took a historically Republican district and made it swing/lean Democratic. And then in North Carolina, we were back. Remember the 12th that I was talking about earlier? We're back to now North Carolina is in the courts for partisan gerrymandering. And this was just so obvious. The folks that were in the legislature on the Redistricting Commission were on tape saying, well, why did you create a there's 10 seats, right? Why did you create a 7 Republican, 3 Democrat district? And those folks are saying, because we couldn't figure out how to do 8-2, right? So they clearly, they were clearly biasing their party in the maps.
I have a question, Allison.
Yeah.
In Washington, our election or whatever commission,
Our commission,
redistricting commission, is bipartisan, and it was equally so. It seemed like 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans.
Always 2 Democrats, always 2 Republicans. Yeah.
But that's on no matter how the size of the state, no matter the size of.
Yep.
So why is it that the Democrats sat by or sit by and let this happen?
So you're thinking the Democratic commissioners let the Republicans choose some things that they should know?
How is it that the Democrats sat by and allow only getting 3 seats when they have 48% to the Republicans 50%? I mean, they're almost split. How does that happen?
The Republicans have the votes. They have control of their House, their Senate, and their governorship, right?
Yeah.
So they have the votes to pass the bill that favors the Republican, it's the map that favors the Republicans.
Didn't the Redistricting Commission have something to say about that?
In North Carolina, they do not have a commission. It's the state legislature that decides.
Okay, that answers that question.
Right? So the bill that passes their state government is the redistricting map, right? So that's why we went to a commission, because at least then it's, 4 people, they're equal, they can duke it out, right? Those kinds of things. Yeah. Okay, so here's our second poll, which is, you can decide if you want to put something in the chat. If you were a Supreme Court justice, how would you decide? And you can put in 0 to 5. Yeah. So 2 4s, right? Clearly something's going on here. Maybe not pegged all the way to a 5, right? Yeah. Well, our current Supreme Court decided not to decide and decided that it was not a federal judiciable kind of thing in a 5-4 decision. So that means that our state constitutions become even more important. And we have in our state constitution, we have the provide for fair and effective representation. So those would be the words we would hang our hat on to make sure that our commission in this case, is doing what we want them to do. And other state constitutions, Pennsylvania was very successful in suing at the state constitutional level and getting their maps redrawn. All of those kinds of things. My league folks in North Carolina are trying their darndest to pull out all the stops. They don't have an initiative process. So it's harder for them they really do have to influence their legislature to try to change the redistricting laws. Okay, questions on partisan gerrymandering? Well, let's spend the last few minutes just talking about reform in Washington State. I've been working on reform to try to increase transparency and accountability and push for a citizen commission instead of the political operative commission that we have. We tried to pass a modernization bill in 2020. We did get it through the House, but it got stopped in the Senate. And basically what I learned is that our legislators do not understand redistricting as much as they probably should, and that we have such a political negotiation system right now that both sides are afraid of losing power and changes to the system, even though this had nothing to do with partisanship. This was about public outreach and language access and all those kinds of things. It was just too much threat to that kind of power balance that we've got. So that didn't pass. Like I said, we ran 8 speak up schools, 15 different locations, did some more training. What's great about teaching people to testify is that they can use it to testify with any public body, which I think is just a great advocacy tool. It's kind of your advocacy superpower. We did an interesting redistricting project called the Data Lenses Project. If anyone's interested, they can go to tinyurl.com/data lenses. If that talk about voting power and kind of in between, not packing and cracking, but kind of in between voting power was interesting, we looked at our state from these 5 lenses and how, if you just looked at that lens, how you might draw the district. So that's that website you can go to. And now we're in the middle of creating maps. And now that the 2020 data dropped, I have to redo all my maps and get them to balanced again with the 2020 data. But the League of Women Voters is planning to submit a proposed mapping solution to the commission as part of our advocacy, and really focused on communities of interest, and trying to understand where it is communities of interest lie and how do we group those folks together for better representation. So I'm using Dave's redistricting app. I highly recommend it. You can go on the League website and you can look at the maps that I've done for drafts, and that is hopefully that is lwvwa.org/maps. You can click through and you can open up the maps. You can see all the different variations that we've been trying. just to get feedback. You can give me more feedback if you don't like the 34th, the way I've drawn the 34th. Happy to take more feedback as we narrow down. We're having a board discussion and vote on September 20th to finalize those maps for the league. Here's the case for working towards a citizen commission. 40% of the people in Washington state don't affiliate with either major party. So having an unaffiliated commissioners kind of makes sense. This is the California Commission, like I described. Those are actors, not the actual people in their brochure. But I got to meet 3 of the actual commissioners, and they said it was the most fantastic thing they'd ever done in their life. It was interesting. They got to go to 150 different meetings all over California. They found out so much about their state and their neighborhoods, and they were well supported and well staffed. So they felt really good about the job that they had done, and they worked as a collaborative group to get the maps out. Here's one possible solution. Maybe we keep those 4 appointed, but we augment with other citizens, and we have 3, 3, and 3, and then we keep our non-voting chair. But we require that one person from each of the 3 groups has to vote for the maps, and we get more folks and more negotiation. It becomes not just a bipartisan tit for tat kind of negotiation, but more conversation about the state and about people in the state. If you're interested, my organization does have a play that's on our website. You can go to politicsofthepossible.com/many maps.
I just put it in the chat for anyone. You can copy and paste, take it with you.
And if you want a nice evening entertainment, my 40-year veteran actress, it does a fabulous job learning, and you can learn about redistricting and learn about the history in Washington state. She plays my grandmother, and it's just a lovely, fun play. If anyone's seen it, we had a premiere in March. And I'll just leave you with, our government only works if we participate. So thank you for spending the evening with me, and I will take any questions.
There it is. Any questions, anybody? Anybody have thoughts or something they want to share? Let me just make sure. Okay. This was really interesting. Thank you, Allison. We've got comments. Thank you, everybody, for your feedback.
Sarah.
And again, there's any of these that I put in the chat and Allison has put in the chat, the addresses for, thanks, Marcy, the addresses for the websites, and feel free to, if you like what the work that these organizations are doing, that's Allison is the ambassador of Politics of the Possible, feel free to donate. There are the link will take
my grandmother's book is also for sale if you want a nice positive story about progressive change in our state. It's a wonderful read. What great Christmas present for all of the people you're trying to get involved in politics in your life.
Yes, yes. So the other thing that I just want to say is that we're going to have all of Allison's information, the contact information for League of Women Voters and the Politics of the Possible. That will be on our program hubs page, programs hub page. Anyway, on our website, 34th LD Democrats, you can go there and you will find all the information about this program, and feel free to contact Allison if you'd like to after tonight, or if you know anybody who couldn't make it tonight, please direct them to the website or our website they can view this program again at their leisure. And anyway, thank you so much, Allison, for a
Thanks, everybody.
really informative program. We will be plugging it. It will be on our website now for infinity. So anytime somebody wants to come and check out the information, they will have access to it from our organization. So thanks again. Have a great evening, everybody. And we will look forward to seeing you at our next meeting, which is September, Sarah? Is that right?
It's the 8th, right? September 8th.
September, thank you. September 8th. Thank you, Steve. Yep. So anyway, we will continue to talk about this issue, this concept. It's really important, and helping people know why their engagement is so important in our democracy. So thanks again. Have a great evening, everybody, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Steve.
See you later.
Bye. Okay.